Hello everyone, and today we'll be talking about the cost of borrowing. The cost of borrowing is what we call interest. What this means is if you ever take a loan or borrow some amount of money, you have to not only pay back that same sum of money, but also pay an additional cost to the lender. That additional cost is what we call interest. So now let's take a look at some ways in which we can calculate interest. Now the first way is simple interest. Simple interest is often used with applications such as car loans or, for example, personal loans, etc. Essentially, any short-term loan, sometimes you'll see simple interest being used. Now, the formula for simple interest is I equals PRT. Let's break this down. I is the interest or the amount of money charged for taking the loan. Again, interest is the cost of borrowing. P is the principal amount or initial amount that you borrow. R is the rate of interest, which is often determined by the lender. And finally, T is the time you'll take to pay back what you borrowed in years. Now let's see this in action. Say, for example, that Carla is a college student looking to buy a new car to make off-campus transportation easier. Short of money, she borrows $30,000 from the bank. That $30,000 is her principal or initial amount that she's borrowing. The interest rate on her loan is 5%, again, probably determined by the lender, and finally, she plans on taking 5 years to pay back the loan. Multiplying these three numbers together, we get $7,500 as the interest. That means that in addition to paying back the initial $30,000 that she borrowed, Carl will also have to pay an additional $7,500 in interest over the next 5 years. That's the cost of borrowing. Now, simple interest is usually used with car loans or short-term loans, but it's actually not seen so much. What you'll see more of used in the real world is compound interest, which is another way to calculate the interest applied on a loan. Unlike simple interest where you just apply the interest rate onto the principal, right? We saw that I equals PRT, we just multiplied the rate by the principal. Compound interest is calculated based on the principal and its accumulated interest. In other words, you can think of it as interest on interest. And this is often used on examples or scenarios such as with your bank account, home loans, etc. Now, the formula for compound interest is A equals P into 1 plus R over N, all to the power of NT. Now, here, A is not the interest. Instead, it's the future value of the loan that you take, including the interest you have to pay. In other words, if you just want to get the interest, you would do A minus P. P is the principal, again, initial amount you borrow. R is the annual interest rate, and it expressed as a decimal. N is the number of times the interest is compounded per unit of time T. So for example, perhaps the interest is compounded monthly, weekly, yearly, etc. And finally, T, like last time, is the amount of time that the money is borrowed for. Now, in this case, like I mentioned earlier, with compound interest, the interest is calculated not only based on the principal, but also the accumulated interest from the last period. And furthermore, the value of n, or the number of times the interest is compounded, can make a significant effect on how much you pay. Let's take a look at an example. Say that after renting a house in the city for 4 years, Dan finally feels ready to buy his own house. So he takes out a loan of $800,000. The interest rate on his loan is 7% compounded monthly, and he plans to pay back the loan over 8 years. Now we can calculate the future value of the loan, or A, using that formula that we saw above, right here. And we end up getting $1,300,000. Now again, this number here is not the interest. It's the future value of the loan. So it means that Dan's initial investment of $800,000 will eventually grow to $1,300,000 when compounded monthly at 7% over the 8 years. So this is how much he's actually going to have to pay. And this is how much he borrowed. So if you wanted to find the interest, or how much extra he paid from what he borrowed, you would just subtract this principal from the future value, or A. Now, you want to make sure that you're careful with compound interest. This is because the interest compounds every time it's calculated, and as a result, if you do not pay your credit balance by the due date, your interest will be charged on the unpaid amount and keep growing. So make sure that every time period you are making your payment. Now let's take a look at the amortization calculation formula. Now the first time I even heard of this or saw the formula, I was totally confused and it seems like a mouthful, but it actually is a pretty simple idea. This formula allows you to figure out the average payment amount for a period of time. Why would you need this? Well, essentially, you're going to usually pay back your loan in increments. It's not like you're going to take out $80,000 and then pay $80,000 in 2 years. Instead, you often do monthly payments over time. And this formula can help you figure out what those payments are going to be. And so you can just plug in these values, P, R, and N, into this formula where P is the principal, R is the interest rate, and N is the number of payments or periods. And based on that, you can find that payment amount, that either it's a monthly payment amount, weekly payment amount, essentially your average payment amount for a period of time. And that can help you figure out, how much you need to be putting aside out of your income to help be paying back for your loans. And now, finally, last time we kind of hinted at how borrowing can be potentially dangerous, and here we just talk a little bit more about the downfalls from debt. So some of the dangers of borrowing include overspending, overwhelming debt, legal actions, and identity fraud. And you can look into all of these, but essentially the bottom line is that if you don't borrow in a way that is thoughtful, you might end up finding yourself in debt. You might end up finding yourself in a situation where the lender is actually going to take legal action against you because you haven't made your payments on time. You might overspend and then figure out that you are just swamped in this debt that you have no idea how to pay off. So again, you really want to be careful with borrowing. This isn't to say that you shouldn't borrow at all. Borrowing can be really useful, and we discussed in the last unit, for example, those 7 borrowing uses. But at the same time, you do want to ask yourself whether you really are capable of paying back this loan over time before you borrow any money. Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you next time.